Good day to everyone who's taken the time to join us at this exciting panel at London Tech Week. My name is Jacqueline. I'm the new Managing Director of the Singapore's Economic Development Board, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Our topic of the day is something close to my heart, technology for good. Having spent 5 years building Smart Nation projects for Singapore, working on digital transformation in government, technology was the way that we thought we could provide digital government services from healthcare to education to payments, housing, and taxes to our citizens in a manner that saved them time and effort. That's what it meant to us. It meant being citizen-centric in design, but also cutting edge in the delivery of digital services. Digital to us enabled many government departments to discover what people needed and then faster and easier ways to deliver it to them. Later, these digital solutions and that digital stack became crucial in the way that we have fought COVID last year and into this year. So with me are three very accomplished persons with very different perspectives, not from government, on how tech startups can be harnessed towards good, which means to us a larger purpose. It could be the planet, it could be education, it could be healthcare, it could be healthier food. Now, all of them are taking on innovation opportunities in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, which is home to 649 million consumers and 13 unicorns valued at $1 billion and above. My first guest, I'd like to introduce Venkatesh Saha. I think he likes to be known as Ven. He's the head of APAC expansion at the fintech Wise, which some of you who are a little bit older like me will remember as TransferWise, which was a very leading edge remittance startup. He also co-leads the global debit card program for Wise, and Wise is located in 9 countries with payments products for consumers, businesses, and more. Ven himself was also from Bain and did advise governments on economic reform and payment solutions in his previous life. Hi, Ven. My next guest is Gilad, and he is an experienced agri-tech entrepreneur and an investor leading a company called Tropic Biosciences. Tropic Biosciences is one of the largest agri gene editing companies in the whole world, and it uses CRISPR and its own gene editing platform to develop higher performing tropical crops, such as coffee and bananas and rice. My final guest is Alice Benting, and she's the co-founder and chief product officer of Entrepreneur First, which is, I think, something that many of you will be very familiar with. Entrepreneur First, or EF, invests in top-end PhDs and other technical experts to help them build world-class deep tech startups. They've created over 300 startups to date worth $3 billion, and I was honored to have been involved in bringing them to Singapore under SG Innovate. Alice is also keenly involved in teaching women to code and is on the AI Council of the United Kingdom. Welcome all. Hi. So I'm just going to start off with some questions that I think all of you may be well equipped to respond to. With COVID and the changes that has wrought to our lives and the challenges that has produced to traditional approaches to health and life sciences, finance, education, and clean tech in Asia, what does tech for good mean to you personally and to your own organization, and how do you feel that it's fulfilling that mission? Perhaps I'd just like to start with Ben.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, Team EDB, for having me here today. I work for a company called Wise, which is headquartered in London in the UK, and our Asia Pacific hub is here in Singapore. Wise's mission is very simple. We want to make international money transactions cheaper, faster, and more convenient. Particularly in today's day and age, when an email can be sent from one country to another, it's free and it's instant. According to various statistics, the average cost of an international remittance, according to World Bank data and others, is anywhere between 5 and 6%. What we are trying to do at Wise is to bring those costs down as much as possible. and by doing so, contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of being able to bring the overall cost of remittances below 3%. Why is this important? Remittances are a key part of economic growth of any country, particularly the many developing countries that we have here in Asia Pacific and in this part of the world. Something that I am proud of that WISE has done recently is to be able to now send money to Fiji, which is in the Pacific. Remittances are a non-trivial part of Fiji's GDP. So anything that we can do to make those remittances cheaper, faster, more convenient, and transparent is technology for good.
Thank you very much for your comments about the importance of remittances to the UN Sustainability Goals and what it does for countries, especially less developed countries in many parts of the world. And I now hear from Gilad about your view about what Tech for Good means for your organization.
Thank you very much, with pleasure. And also it's a real pleasure to be here today. I would say that the concept of Tech for Good is something that's very much core to our existence and vision at Tropic Biosciences. When we got started just over 5 years ago, it was with a clear understanding that there is a very big gap in the growing population need for food over the next 30 years and the ability of current agricultural practice to deliver on that demand. And that is being further challenged today by climate change, and we can also talk a little bit about how COVID is impacting that. And in our view, the ability to deliver on that greater demand for food and provide people in developing countries the food security that they require to live productive and fruitful lives is best addressed through technology. So when we started Tropic Biosciences, our vision was to truly harness the most cutting edge genetic innovation and technology tools in order to address food needs in the tropics, or more broadly in developing nations, primarily in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. This is what we've been doing over the last few years, harnessing these fantastic tools to develop varieties, for example, of bananas that are resistant to diseases, or rice, which is higher yielding than traditional rice production. And I would say, we have quite a diverse team today, but what maybe kind of is very core to our passion is that everyone is really excited about using these types of technologies, for the greater good of humanity. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gilad. And I really do think that with the increasing pace of climate change and changing weather patterns, I think, especially as someone who does live in the tropics, trying to get higher yield, disease-resistant crops is going to be quite critical for food security, and just making sure that everyone can still eat. We in Singapore have other challenges with climate change, including rising sea levels, but definitely something about food security will affect almost every part of the world. Thanks a lot. Maybe I'll pose the question to Alice now about how you think Tech for Good has changed the way that your organization chooses its entrepreneurs and its teams.
So at Company First, we select individuals rather than companies, and part of our process is helping them work out what to work on. One of the things that we see as a very clear trend is that most of the individuals that join us want to have a positive impact in the world, and are much more inclined to try and choose ideas that will have a positive impact. I think one of the things that always surprises me is how often they're building what seem like very traditional companies that aren't obviously tech for good, but because of the kind of founders they have this sort of tech for good purpose instilled from the very beginning of the company. We've got a company that was founded in Singapore called Transcelestial, and what they're doing is they're creating a space laser network that will bring internet to everywhere in the world. So it's not a company that is, it's not a social enterprise. It's not a company that is set up explicitly with a social mission. But ultimately, if they can fulfill their goal of bringing internet to everyone, it will have a huge positive impact on the world. I mean, even we've got a company called Tractable that recently became a unicorn that's a computer vision company, and they apply computer vision to car insurance. On the face of things, that doesn't sound particularly tech for good, but the impact of their computer vision is that they have stopped as many cars as Tesla produced last year from being scrapped, because those cars are now more accurately assessed and are fixed instead. And so just when you think about the environmental impact of stopping all of those precious metals, all of that kind of metals generally, from going into landfill or whatever else, it's a major positive impact. So I think one of the things I'm very excited about is just seeing this next generation of founders coming through who have tech for good at the heart of what they do, just because of who they are.
Thank you so much, Alice. That's really very inspiring. I mean, from space-related connectivity to places that don't have it, all the way to computer vision for cars and insurance. I think there are many ways in which tech for good does not mean necessarily a social enterprise, does not necessarily mean that it is not for profit, but that it has a clear purpose and a problem to solve in the world. And I think that's what's coming quite strongly from all three of my partners here today. Now, I'd just like to focus on Venkatesh for a moment and the work that you're doing in WISE. We discussed that APAC was really one of the fastest growing regions for WISE, and remittance and the need to bring that to a wider and less developed population was definitely one driver of that. And we also know that you're expanding your presence in Singapore. Can you tell us a little bit about some drivers that you see, for tech for good? For example, the need for financial inclusion or supporting SME exports, that could be the things that are powering WISE's growth in the APAC region.
Our heritage as a company has primarily been around solving consumer remittances, which is people like you and me sending money from bank account in country A to bank account in country B. Increasingly, though, what we have realized and learned along the way is it's not just people who have borderless lives who are increasingly living across countries and continents, but it's also businesses that have borderless lives. Particularly in the last 18 months, we've learned how borderless these supply chains are, how important trade is to various economies. But what has not kept up is a good payment solution to make all of this trade actually flow smoothly. And we at WISE feel that we are trying in our own small way to contribute to this. If you look at some numbers here, over 70% of businesses in Asia Pacific are inherently global, which means they trade, they either buy things or sell things internationally. And in some of the surveys that we have done, close to 45% of them said that issues around foreign exchange, which is sending, receiving, storing, and spending, were actually barriers to growth. Now, small and medium-sized businesses, whether you're here in Singapore or elsewhere, are the backbone of any economy. So if we as WISE can play a small part in improving this experience and helping people save some money so they can then reinvest it in their businesses, grow, hire more people, that is our view on tech for good and how we can contribute.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you feel that this is something that is largely to be led by the private sector? From a very bottom-up kind of mechanism? Or do you think that the public sector and governments have quite a big role to play in this as well?
That's an interesting question, Jacqueline, because I know you have spent the better part of your career in creating a lot of this enabling infrastructure. But in my view, I think the government has a few responsibilities. One is what I call is building the hard infrastructure. And some really great examples of it are the instant payment infrastructure that we have here in Singapore. I can send money to you, Jacqueline. It's free, it's instant. I don't even think twice about it. But on top of that is what is the soft infrastructure, creating that enabling regulation where businesses like us can come to Singapore, we can get licensed quickly and efficiently, and we can offer our services. And then what brings it all together is then opening some of this innovation to companies like us. So what companies like us have done is we have connected to the national ID database, which is called MyInfo here in Singapore. This allows us to be able to verify our customers instantly. Verification is extremely important in financial services. And if we can verify them cheaply and instantly, that means they can start using our service immediately, which means they can then start saving money immediately. Right. So I think a combination of all of this, where the government is the enabler, creates those opportunities, but then it is the private sector that steps up and aggressively takes advantage of them, is what I see as enabling growth for all of us, not just for us as a company, but also for Singapore.
Thank you very much, Ben. So it does sound like in your conception, the ability to have applications that, you know, are for good really relies on sort of layers that are created by the public and private sector together. And I think
Correct.
that's the most efficient way to have the most impact.
Correct. But what Singapore does particularly well is also give the private sector a seat at the table where we can give you suggestions on what are the things that can be done differently and can be done better. I've served myself on things like MAS working groups and other such advisories here in Singapore. And I think what has always amazed me is this willingness to listen.
Thanks a lot. I'll certainly convey that feedback back to my colleagues at MAS. And that's something we take very seriously as well in the Economic Development Board. Maybe a little turn the spotlight over to Gilad for a moment and talk a little bit about not just climate change, but the pandemic. The pandemic uncovered pretty strong weaknesses in our global food production and supply chain. In fact, there is word that with the shipping difficulties that we're facing, I mean, we're looking at quite a lot of inflation very possibly happening in the food supply chain coming on in the coming year. Tropic Biosciences, because you develop these high-performing commercial varieties of tropical crops, and also tries to improve crop sustainability, might have a couple of perspectives on how that has first affected how that could actually improve the situation, but also maybe you could give us a wider perspective on what are the tech for good opportunities in this environment for both UK and European agri-tech companies who are thinking of moving to Asia or solving problems related to Asia.
Absolutely, with pleasure. I'd say maybe first of all on the challenge, I think you touched on it and you described it very, very well. One of the things that we're telling people when we meet with them these days is that if people weren't talking about COVID right now, which they rightfully are talking about, more and more people would be talking about global food prices today. So it's probably not out there enough, the fact that from the beginning of the year, global food prices went up by more than 30%, partly because of COVID-19, but also on the back of a much kind of longer term trend of climate change. Now that spike in prices, which is likely to stay with us in the future, is going to have a tremendously negative, unfortunately, impact on the lives of people globally, but primarily in areas in Southeast Asia where already people are paying a decent portion of their wages on acquiring food. Now, as for the opportunity, probably Tropic Biosciences is a good example of this linkage between the UK or more broadly Europe and Southeast Asia, because we are a company that's primarily based in the UK, in an area called Norwich. But I can tell you that most of us spend a lot of our working day on calls with either with Singapore or the Philippines or in Latin America or Africa. So we have a very much a global view. And I would say that at the core today, that linkage is that in our work today, we tap into probably decades worth of expertise that have been developed in places like the UK, from research, from academia, but also from some of the large seed companies that are based in this area. But we are taking these technologies and applying them into crops and markets that are eventually primarily Southeast Asian in nature, whether it's rice or coffee or banana. I do believe, and we're already seeing it today, is that a lot of this expertise and ambition is moving toward these areas, and this is something that we are very much in our plans. And again, tying it back to COVID-19, I think that one of the reasons that we currently, for example, don't have an office in Singapore is that it's very hard to travel, and we cannot travel to the state very easily. But we definitely see an opportunity in summary to use a lot of this expertise, these ambitions, and deploy them in these massive, very interesting markets.
Yes, I do agree. The minute that you can start traveling, we start reopening again, not just us, but many countries in the world, and in particularly the Asia Pacific. I think it's a good time for you to start coming here and think about, whether you want to have some research opportunities.
Absolutely, absolutely. We would love that.
And I also like to ask you though, how, in the interim, did you have a perspective on how European and UK startups in this space could possibly still engage your investors and partners in Southeast Asia? Do you feel in any way that because there might be an understanding of sustainability and climate change challenges that is a bit different from the kind of urgency you're getting in Europe, perhaps, when you have some countries do have different perspectives about the urgency of climate change and what it means to their crops, for example, compared to some other more developed countries. Do you feel that that's a big challenge?
Again, we're only talking from our experience. We've been incredibly fortunate to work with several fantastic investors from Southeast Asia, and maybe a couple of examples, of course, Temasek from Singapore, as well as Sumitomo Corporation from Japan. And working with these world-class organizations over the last few years, I think we have a relatively good perspective. I think there's definitely an opportunity for European or UK startup companies to engage with such investors. There's absolutely interest, and they're always, I would assume, looking for good companies to partner with. What I would definitely advise is also everything makes a lot more sense when part of a real part of your strategy has to do with local markets. So, for example, for us, the work with coffee, banana, and rice made a fantastic synergy, and I think that it elevated the discussion beyond capital investment, but also into partnerships and how we can support each other through their portfolios and core businesses. As for sustainability, again, we are working with some incredibly sophisticated investors. So I honestly cannot say that I feel that there is any kind of lagging of these investors behind some of the European investors. I think that I would probably even say the opposite. I would say that it's very easy to look at some of the initiatives coming from Temasek and see that in many ways, I think they're actually leading the charge. They've identified the need for long-term sustainable solutions, probably before many others. But with that, from our little experience working in Singapore, I feel that even if there is a small gap, I will not be surprised if within a year or two, Singapore would be the leader in that as well. So we're quite confident it will go well.
We'll try our best, and we'll also try our best on behalf of our whole region to be a good hub for a lot of solutioning in this space as the effects of climate change start to bear down on food security. Alice, Entrepreneur First has been quite a pioneer investing in talent, even before the very highly technical talent that you have becomes a company or even a team. I've seen a few of your sprints here, and I've just seen groups of people who didn't know each other before get put together as part of entrepreneur teams, and then becoming companies. Now, you are present across Europe and in Canada and in Asia. We know that Singapore is one of your hubs in Southeast Asia. Can we know a little bit more about your reasons for choosing Singapore as your hub here and being invested in the region?
Sure. So we're in 6 sites across the world, but when we were thinking about expansion, the first site we started after London was Singapore. So it was our first attempt at building EF elsewhere in the world. The reason why going to Singapore in particular as a first route for expansion became so obvious to us was the quality of the talent in Singapore is fantastic. The fact that the country aggregates much of the best talent from across Southeast Asia made it a obvious location for us to go to. That, alongside the very easy business climate, Singapore has worked very hard to make doing business there as simple as possible, and the growing startup scene. When we first went there, just now 5-6 years ago, the startup scene was still quite nascent, but it was just at that point where it was about to go through the most enormous growth curve, where you saw more and more investors, particularly at the seed stage and the Series A stage, getting started and deploying capital. So I suppose when we're thinking about good locations for EF, you have to have those two pieces. You need to have the amazing talent, which is usually driven by having a fantastic university ecosystem, alongside having a strong venture capital scene. And Singapore had both of those. I think we've been very lucky as well to have amazing support from the government to ease our path into Singapore and to connect us into the startup network there as well. So I think we've been delighted by making that our first move into Asia and into expansion, and it's really given us a blueprint on how we wanted to expand across the rest of the world as well.
Thank you very much. And do you think that Entrepreneur First can also, do a little bit more to help sort of UK and European founders access tech for good kind of innovation or business opportunities in Singapore and Southeast Asia?
Very much so. We know that at EF, one of our strong principles is we want to build globally important companies. We don't want to build companies that are just trying to serve their local market. And that's as true for our Singaporean companies as it is for our UK or French companies. We want to help them access new markets all around the world. Many of our companies are looking increasingly from Europe to Asia rather than to the US. They see the opportunity in Asia, and for companies working in particular areas, it makes more sense for them to go east rather than going west. We do a lot at the moment to help our community connect between Europe and Asia, particularly through our amazing alumni community. But also we're doing more and more work as our alumni grow and develop to help them think through, what are the practical steps to accessing a market like Singapore, and how can they use Singapore as their launch pad for the rest of Southeast Asia.
Thanks. Now, on that note, I would actually like to ask a little bit of a more a difficult question, I think, for all three of my guests here. You've mentioned, Alice, that you really want to use Singapore as a launch pad for your startups to sort of access the rest of the region. We know that there are lots of opportunities, but there are also a lot of challenges associated with that. So I suppose with your extensive experience in your areas, either payments or agri-tech or sort of creating startups, what are the challenges that startups face in trying to create positive societal impact in Asia? What might be some of the challenges that they are facing, and how have they been overcoming these challenges? I'm happy to throw this open to anyone who would like to start first. Just raise your hand.
I'm happy to start if that's okay with everyone.
Sure thing.
So maybe just to share from our experience, I mentioned earlier that we work with many large companies in Southeast Asia, some of them, for example, based in the Philippines or in Vietnam or in China. But what has been interesting for us is that when we work with these companies, a lot of the time we speak with the field operators, but then we end up doing a lot of the work with their Singapore office, for example, where there's either researchers or legal or just business professionals. And I think it probably hints on two of the challenges of companies like us, let's call it small, medium-sized startup companies working in the very, very large Asia-Pacific region. One is probably cultural, and meaning business culture. I can attest for myself before Tropic Biosciences, I had very little experience working with companies in the region. And the second one has to do with business infrastructures. For a company like us to be able to adapt ourselves to legal and regulatory practices across many countries is incredibly challenging. So what we've experienced is Singapore becoming this incredibly important point of entry to doing business in the region. It provides us access not just to other researchers that have international experience that we can work with, but also the business infrastructure to align and come together around very clear legal frameworks, business practices, and even regulatory constraints. So again, touching on these two challenges, the cultural and the business infrastructure, and also the solution, which we think that Singapore has been an incredible enabler in overcoming these challenges.
Thank you very much. I think the complexity and I think the diversity of Southeast Asia and the Asian region, it does present some of these challenges, and I'm really glad that you found that Singapore is a good translator or hub in that sense as a gateway. And I hope that a lot of startups also sort of get that sense that it might be a good place to get a foothold before coming into the region. Are there any other challenges that guests might like to raise?
From our perspective at WISE, we, as I mentioned earlier, are trying to make international money transactions cheaper, fairer, more convenient. By our own estimates, we are probably saving our consumers close to £1 billion every year in terms of hidden fees and really bad FX markups. But the reality is there is still £150 billion that's being lost each year for no good reason. And we want to be able to bring our product to as many markets, as many consumers as fast as possible. And as Gilad mentioned, unlike in Europe, where a single license can allow us to passport our services across the entire continent and be able to take our services to close to 30 markets overnight, here we have to invest the time and effort to get to know each country better, given the hyperdiversity and how local they are, to get to know each regulator, to get to know each payment system before we can offer a compelling and local solution that makes sense, that is user-friendly, and that is in line with our mission. So if only there was a way to be able to do this faster, I think that would be my wish. But certainly being here in Singapore has helped a lot. It's important to be here because Singapore allows you to understand the region, the challenges of the region, and then resource appropriately from it going forward.
Thanks, Ben. I think it's often said that, if you are trying to do good, sometimes the places that you go to do it are the hardest for you to actually get it done. So I think that's a lot of alignment in that.
Certainly, I have the scars for that.
I hope that you keep persevering. Alice?
So building on the points that have already been made, I think one of the challenges for the Southeast Asia region, very similar to Europe, is that you do have such a diversity of culture and language. So even if you use Singapore as a launchpad, you're still addressing very, very different markets. But I do think that's something that particularly European companies are very used to having to deal with. Thinking about tech for good specifically, I think just generally one of the challenges that we see companies have is what is the balance between positioning yourself as tech for good and maybe not being taken seriously commercially, versus being seen as a full commercial company, and then maybe not being able to attract the talent that you want or really fulfill the mission of the company in the way that you would want. So it's less of a Singapore-specific challenge, but I think as we see this new wave of companies coming through that are commercial, that are hyper-ambitious, and that do have many of the traits that we've seen of unicorns that have been successful in the past, but have this foundational underpinning of, we do want to have good social impact, and we will work out how that filters through our organization and product as we grow.
Yeah, that's always been a perennial challenge about, the extent to which the impact and the commercial viability actually kind of blends in together. Have you got any particular advice for companies who are in that situation? Because, without, jumping straight into deciding that something is a social enterprise rather than a likely unicorn, there's a large allotment of time where you kind of try and make things work. How would you advise a young entrepreneur in that situation?
Sure. So the key thing is to think about business model. So ultimately, if you are making money, it kind of doesn't matter whether you are for good or not. And I think often when people think about social enterprise, the business model and significant revenue generation is thought of as an afterthought. For any business, to be a business that can scale and to be sustainable, you need to have a robust business model. And so for anyone who's thinking about building a company that has tech for good at its heart, I would put your business model front and center. I don't think many people know this, but Entrepreneur First was started as a social enterprise. We were a registered community interest company, which is a form of sort of charity in the UK. And what we found was that we didn't actually think about our business model. We didn't have a business model for the first 3 years. And it was really only when we lent into finding a way to sustainably generate revenue that we changed and became a for-profit company. Now we're a venture capital firm. It's probably quite rare for companies to go from almost a charity to become a VC. But ultimately, having a business model that scaled with what we wanted to do, it enabled us to have far more impact than we would have in our previous structure.
Very interesting perspective, and I think we had forgotten that you are also actually that you started out in a very different origins, and it's often that you find that something that started out with a very commercial purpose did end up being social, but yours is an example of how you actually had quite a strong social purpose, which was to bring entrepreneurship and deep tech talent together, and that's really scaled into the business. And that's made a lot of commercial sense. That's a really interesting point. Well, unfortunately, I think we're coming to the end of our discussion. We've run out of time. But before we end this panel, could I request for each panelist to perhaps leave our audience with one piece of takeaway or advice or opportunity that you would like to share with them about collaborating with this impact tech for good ecosystem in Singapore and Southeast Asia? What would you like to leave as a piece of advice? Ben?
We've now been in Singapore for, I think, 4+ years. And in that time, Singapore has given us a fantastic base for our business to grow. And as our business has grown, today we are 200+ people in Singapore alone, complemented by a network of offices in market across all of our key Asia Pacific markets. I think for me, in terms of collaboration, it's really about making the best of all the opportunities that Singapore gives you. And our own journey, I think, is a good one. It was the Economic Development Board that held our hand and initially convinced us to come here and set up here. When we got here, it was MAS that took us through a very efficient licensing process. When we figured out we couldn't do digital KYC here, we passed that feedback on to the various arms of Singapore government, and you were among the many people who stepped up and found a solution for us in MyInfo, and we were the first to adopt it. And we now take this as a best in practice example to many other countries that we go to say, this is what good customer ID looks like. And then moving on more recently, where now, MAS in Singapore have invited us to be a direct participant here in the payment system. So the main message I want to say is that Singapore is willing to listen is willing to work with you and is willing to support companies that are serious about Asia and Asia Pacific and want to be able to grow. But you have to grab those opportunities and get yourself a seat at that table.
Thanks a lot, Ben. That's quite an endorsement. We promised we didn't put him up to this. But thank you very much for that takeaway. Gilad?
Sure, I'll give a couple of points. The first one, for entrepreneurs who haven't yet had the opportunity to visit Singapore, I would highly recommend it as soon as possible, of course, with COVID, and spend some time in the region. Just as Ben mentioned, the opportunities that are there are fantastic, and I think there's something almost magical about the ambition and the positivity of the people. It's quite alluring. The second point, more broadly around Tech for Good, I would say that we highly recommend that companies take this concept and make them part of their core and less of a kind of a peripheral goal or kind of a marketing slogan. Coming from a point of sustainability in a world of agriculture, we truly believe that companies that truly do good for the world, their likelihood of success over the long-term horizon is significantly higher than companies that do not. So we couldn't be a stronger supporter of the Tech for Good initiative and the work around that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gilad. Alice?
Well, as firstly, to build on the points already said, my first thing would be to say, if you haven't spent time thinking about building your company in Singapore, you should. Now is the time. We've been very impressed at how fast our business has been able to grow there, and what opportunity there is there. As is my second point, thinking about Tech for Good, would be there's a long-held maxim of founders are either missionaries or mercenaries. Missionaries are good because they have a very strong belief about what they want to create. Mercenaries are bad because they want to make money. And I suppose I would encourage every founder to think about being a missionary and a mercenary. What's the Venn diagram of the two, where you have a clear mission that you want to achieve. You know why you want to achieve it. You know how it can do good in the world, but you're also very clear about how it can make money, because that is how you scale, and that's how you have truly global impact.
Thanks. Those are really apt words, Alice. And so I'd like to thank, on that note, all my guests, Venkatesh, Gilad, and Alice, for joining us at this panel at London Tech Week. I fully and wholeheartedly agree that there are, first of all, many opportunities within Asia and Southeast Asia in particular to really grow out a company that wants to make impact and wants to change the lives of large numbers of individuals and solve real world problems using technology. And I fully agree that none of that has to be against any larger purpose or commercial purpose, because Tech for Good is also good for tech, and also good for your bottom line. What is good for the world is also good for companies. And that's the way that we think of it in Singapore. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day ahead. And for those of you who remain as our guests and audience on this program, I'd just like to highlight on the screen in front of you, I think you'll see some links to Switch, as well as the registration website for the B2B Innovation Matching Workshops. These are aimed to connect companies and scale-ups in the EU and the UK to partners in Singapore and Southeast Asia who could be your Tech for Good business and innovation partners. So do click on those links, and that will bring you to both the Innovation Matching Workshops as well as Switch, which is the Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology. With that, I thank you and goodbye.